This was George Jackson. Got it. Do I have to hit continue too? Yeah. All right. So you got to read this book. Here's the point of the 99 books that were in George Jackson's cell, which is going to be a whole nother conversation. Um, of the 100 books at the Labor Community Strategy Center and our Strategy and Soul bookstore, Soledad Brother is certainly one of them. It's an amazing discourse. And I think one of the things I want you to understand as we listen today is George was a strong advocate of armed struggle. In some of the work, like in his book, Blood in My Eye, he does talk about guerrilla warfare. But as you'll hear throughout the day, the evening, George's greatest guerrilla warfare was in the realm of ideas. And at some time he was focusing on armed struggle. As you'll hear in the first clip, which is a audio, he's not focusing on armed struggle. He's focusing on just the opposite, on the ideological struggle and the cultural struggle. So we're about to hear a clip from George Jackson, after which we're going to see two videos from Angela Davis, after which we're going to hear my 7-minute contribution to this project. After that, we're going to hear a 4-minute audio from James Baldwin. And after that, we're going to listen to Eddie Conway, who was a political prisoner 43 years and is now working for the Real News Network. And our friend Victor Wallace is also going to talk about the amazing news that our friend David Gilbert has been granted clemency, and we hope will be released by the parole board very, very soon. So it'll be a relatively long evening, but I think an important one. And with that, we're going to play an audio of George Jackson on fascism. Maybe we could put some video up, but.
Oh, I apologize. I'm speaking on mute. Can everyone see my screen that has the invitation for tonight? Great, great, great. Okay.
I begin with the idea that fascism has already taken over this country. It took over during the Depression. And all above ground political organizations has got to proceed. I mean, anything that's effective, that's really revolutionary. I'm convinced if it's really revolutionary, because of the existence of the fascist state, there's going to be resistance to every move that we make. Consequently, it's going to take a lot of brain work, footwork, to avoid the pitfalls and traps that the fascists are going to set up for us. I'm convinced that fascism exists in this country. And if you think about it a while, you understand that one of the principal cornerstones of fascism is disguise. There's 2 or 3 faces of fascism. The original thing, where it begins as a almost anti-establishment, intellectualized movement. Once it seizes power, its whole complexion changes into one of terrorism, the suppression of vanguard parties and demobilization of the lower classes. When it goes into its third state, as it has done here in the United States, I'm convinced that the United States has taken fascism to its apex. And we're in the third stage. We're living in the third stage here in the United States. And it's not necessary for the fascists to perpetuate themselves, to maintain themselves any longer with the out-and-out brutal force. the impressions that we get from the movies and from the propaganda system that fascism is a period of doors being kicked down and people being gunned down in concentration camps. That's just a transitory period of fascism. Once it's established itself and is in power securely, then the whole complexion of the movement changes altogether. They have then control of the mass opinion molding machinery, and the upper classes have their governing elites to affect their ideals and to perpetuate themselves. And what is the essence of fascism is counter-revolution. Any real opposition political activity that's going to prevail after the fact of the emergence of the fascist state has to be very, very subtle, and it has to carry a threat, a latent threat. Anything that we do that is really revolutionary is going to be contested. I can give you 1,000 examples. I'm talking about the obituaries, the Panthers, and all the others. I'm convinced that fascism exists in this country, and consequently, my political approach to antithesis after the establishment of the fact of fascism has to be a cultural revolutionary thing. We have too many convinced Americans. Americanism is fascism in itself, right from the beginning. But we have too many convinced fascists in this country who are willing to protect it to the death. How can we attack at the productive point? An attack, a simple, direct attack at the productive point, at the plant, it's absurd. The interest is fortified. It's been fortified. The opposition is well aware of Lenin. Very, very, very up on Lenin, and Mussolini, the architect of the first successful fascist state, was at one time a communist. And who could possibly be the best architect of a counter-positive mobilization of people's movements than a fascist, a guy who's been trained than a communist, a guy who's been trained all his life in scientific methods of socialist organization. They're up on us. They know about our old ways of organizing. And then, after the war, the consumer's market, the cornucopia of cheap, mass-produced, the flea market. That's part of the continuing basis of compromise. Some people's demands are being met, see? And they're convinced that the American way is the right way. As fascism emerged and advanced and took hold, it became impossible for us to use old methods. They're up on Lenin. I'm convinced that from here, where we stand right now, the only way to advance revolutionary consciousness or reestablish the feeling of community, reestablish our class consciousness, is to create revolutionary culture. I believe in the commune, the ideal of the central city communes. And through the communes, as we fill in vacuums at the power elite, or the governing elite and the upper classes have left, as we fill in these vacuums and give people something to hold, something to defend, as we extend our programs into significant areas, attacking property relations, we'll be striking two blows at one time. We'll be re-educating, as you emphasized. We'll be re-educating, and we'll be preparing the people to defend themselves. This is the whole thing about the people aren't ready now. It's presuming that the people aren't willing or capable or have enough brain power. If they haven't the thought capacity to act in their own defense. And we counteract this by giving them something to defend, something to hold. And as our programs extend into the significant areas of property rights enjoyed by the fascists, then we'll be moving into military activity. For an example, I'll give you a brief example. What uses a rent strike if we allow the pigs to move in and beat everybody up and set them out on the street? You dig? You know what I'm saying? It's very simple to convince the people with our political elements that they should withhold their rent as a positive material gain for them to go along with the program. But we make no advance whatsoever in revolutionary consciousness and class consciousness, rebuilding of class consciousness. After the fact of fascism, it means that we have to first reestablish class consciousness, or revolutionary consciousness, or whatever you choose to call it. We have to reestablish the sense of community. Fascism destroys the sense of community, and among the lower classes, and then the upper classes, they strengthen their sense of community. The so-termed diversification of stock ownership. Well, what it did actually was create a great community of interest among the upper classes. They are no longer interested in the survival of their one individual concern or firm. Fascism means that this upper class is now concerned with the general survival of the whole business system. This is a business-based elite, a business-based upper class. And they no longer compete with each other. They have a great community of interest. We have to establish a community of interest of our own from the bottom. Consequently, that means advancing along a cultural, revolutionary, communal form. And it makes a great deal of sense what Huey Newton and the brothers are saying. We have to prove to the world and to this country and to the fascists that the concentration camp technique will not work on us. That's our whole job right now. Later on, once out, it'll be a little different. It'll be a little different.
Can people hear me now? No. I mean, we could do word for word on this. There's so many brilliant things in there. I just want to focus on his idea of a cultural commons and a center of resistance. And that's certainly what the Labor Community Strategy Center, what Strategy and Soul is trying to do, what this film club is trying to do. There's so many brilliant observations, in my opinion, in there. One being that a lot of the fascists are either former communists or were trained in studying communism because they are counter-revolutionary. So they study us all the time with the goal of trying to beat us. We can go on and on. I mean, I think it was absolutely brilliant, and we'll save most of it for the end. But I just want you to hear and I heard the complexity of this man's mind. Imagine him and Angela Davis talking. That would be a hell of a conversation. And with that, I'm going to introduce Angela Davis. I'm trying to get Cynthia Hamilton on the line. I'm going to call her after the first Angela Davis clip, chanting. While it's on, I will call Cynthia. She's in Rhode Island, is fighting some disabilities that she's trying to figure out how to get on the phone and comment. But let's start with Angela Davis. There's so much to say. I mean, for some of us, we know it really well. For other people, it's like a caricature. Angela Davis was raised in a pro-communist family, very exposed to Marxism at a very early age, studied, among other places, in Germany, and studied sort of classic Marxism, studied with Marcuse at San Diego State. But a lot of these were not the Marxism based on national liberation theory. But she was Black. And one of the things that happened to her is she was fired at the UC system for teaching. And in the process, as you'll hear, of teaching, she became a cause célèbre of the radical Black woman, feminist, Marxist, open communist. And she was fired by the UC system, but somehow was under a restraining order to fire her completely, so she was still able to teach. In the process, as she will explain, she meets George Jackson. And the Communist Party sets up what's called the Che Lumumba Club. That is to say, the Communist Party was aware that it wasn't as good on race as it should have been, and it wasn't reaching out to Black and Latinx revolutionary people. So the blacks especially set up the Che Lumumba Club inside the Communist Party that worked very closely with the Black Panther Party, and Angela became sort of a member of both. The obvious story, even if you all heard it, is that she became very close with George Jackson. She became very close with Jonathan Jackson, his younger brother. Angela did have guns registered to her to protect her against the endless threats to kill her. Somehow, Jonathan got some of those guns, or someone got some of those guns. And yes, those guns were used in the courthouse shootout at Marin County. They were traced to Angela. We know Angela did not support that, just even philosophically, but more importantly, it was, Jonathan was wonderful, but she wasn't supporting that he should take a gun and try to free George by capturing a judge. But as soon as she found that out, she realized the only solution was to go underground or she would be murdered. So she became, back in our day, the Angela Davis poster was like the Huey Newton. I mean, she was the revolutionary superstar, but she was on the run. She was eventually apprehended, thank God not killed, brought back into a trial where she was acquitted of all charges. And more amazingly, she's staying nonstop to this day as a brilliant feminist, anti-imperialist, pro-Black nationalist figure. So the interview you're hearing now is very new, and it was done by Claude and Nathaniel, who did this amazing job for the 99 book project. And with that, we're going to listen to the first part of Angela Davis's Thinking Out Loud. And I have one more observation as you listen. Her affection and excitement about the relationship with George still comes through 50 years later, as it should. Hello, Kazembe, glad you're with us. Claude Marks, if you stay, we'd love to have you on, Claude. So I got this wonderful email from Abraham Ndungo. It says, "Hi, Eric, you might not recall."
Eric, you're muted.
Thanks. Sorry, everybody. What are you ready, Channing?
I'm sorry, the video has been playing for 3 minutes. Are you not hearing it?
No, we're not seeing it.
No.
We're not seeing it.
Need to share the screen.
Well, he knows what to do. He's the best. But anyway,
All this time I thought you guys were hearing it. Sorry. I was wondering why are you talking? All right, sorry, starting over.
got it. Thanks. Whoever said that.
I encountered George Jackson for the first time in connection with the organizing efforts around the case of the Soledad Brothers in Los Angeles. I was teaching at UCLA. I had been fired from my position and had a court injunction that allowed me to continue to teach. At the same time, I was having to fight for my right to teach. I met George in person when I traveled to Salinas with a group of people from the campus at UCLA to attend one of the hearings that was happening. By that time, we had done a lot of organizing on the campus, and we brought people from Southern California to participate in the hearing. And that was the very first time I saw him. And I didn't really have the opportunity to have a long conversation with him because you know what conditions are like when you have prisoners who are shackled and chained inside of a courtroom. But I did get to know his family well and embarked upon a correspondence with him. So my relationship with George was largely through the letters we exchanged around a whole range of issues. I was totally impressed because here was someone who had been in prison for almost 10 years. He was extremely learned. You know, I remember thinking at some point, maybe George should be teaching the course that I'm supposed to be teaching on Marxism here at the university. But it was the first time that I came to be aware of the prison as a site for learning and knowledge production. And I think the impact that George had on other people behind bars was to encourage them to learn how to live the life of the mind to a certain extent, to emphasize intellectual work as a way to retain some modicum of freedom behind bars. Very soon I realized that he wasn't simply an individual. He wasn't simply an extraordinary individual, which he was. But at the same time, he encouraged community and collective efforts and political education. It was really an eye-opening experience because I had been doing work around political prisoners for quite some time. But this was the first time I began to get a sense of life under those conditions, and not only the oppressiveness of prison life, but the ways in which George and others were using that time to learn and develop themselves. And I suppose what was most impressive to me, and this has remained with me to this date, is the extent to which he was totally aware of what was happening in the so-called free world, and had ideas that were profound, and to this day, I always reflect on the fact that if we could use all of the intellectual energy of people who have spent all of this time teaching themselves and learning, that we could perhaps really begin to address these huge problems in our society. We could figure out, how to begin to move in a more radical, more progressive direction. In response to the question about the impact George had on my own capacity to think more deeply about the institution of the prison. What I should say first is that that my focus had been on political prisoners. I had been involved in many campaigns to free political prisoners, whether it was Huey Newton, whether it was Lolita Lebron, whether it was Los Siete de la Raza. This was my connection with the prison, and that actually had a long history because when I was much younger, I was a part of a community that involved people who ended up going to prison during the McCarthy era. My parents were friends with people who were sought by the FBI because of their membership in the Communist Party. So I always tended to think about that institution as the place where political radicals were those who constituted explicit dangers to the state. I didn't think about the larger functioning of the prison as an apparatus of racism and repression until I began to have this correspondence with George, and it struck me that we can't simply talk about people who are in prison for their political beliefs and activities, but we have to begin to analyze the institution as a whole, and that was a really powerful insight. And when one has been affected so long by the prevailing ideology, and you don't question the fact that this person is a criminal, so obviously that person belongs in prison. When one realizes that these constructions are all ideological, it opens up so many new vistas, and it allowed me to think not only as George had formulated about the way in which the institution itself functioned as an apparatus of racism, and therefore simply focusing on political prisoners did not address the larger function of the institution. And I also recognized that as long as I was living in the so-called free world, I tended to think about jails and prisons as affecting men primarily. And so as a result of my thinking about the institution in ways that George introduced to me, I began to think about the specific role of the institution in relation to women. Because what I experienced was something I had never, ever imagined, because all of the literature I had read, all of the conversations had been around men. So I can say that my engagement with George had a profound and transformative effect on my thinking.
Is that number one, Channing? Okay. Barbara Lott Holland, do you have a few words you want to say in response of just anything you're thinking about? And you're muted.
So much, but I'm just going to take where my mind was at the end. There was a lot of a few new things that I learned about Angela that I always, when I first heard about her or was originally politicized, I thought of her as always being and starting from the roots as a feminist and not someone that was fighting for political prisoners and actually looking at the prison industrial complex as a thing that that captured men primarily and not women. I think one of the interesting things that she said, and I wrote it down, was that she, after meeting George and having these conversations with him, is that she learned from him and understood that the prison was a site for learning and the knowledge of production, which I thought was very interesting, and that took to heart to me. So that was one of the, and I wrote it down because I didn't think of it that way as well. But even with George, understanding the different degrees and the higher learning that he actually did while in prison, and the fact that he even talked about the fascist state and the 3 different degrees of it, and where we are now in this 3rd state of fascism that is actually eating our society alive. So I'll stop there.
Well, can people hear me? I'm sorry, I keep, I'm on, right?
Yes, John.
Well, it's just, you know, the high level of intellectual thought that we did in the 60s, the philosophical nature of things, looking at the whole world, just listening to George first and then listening to Angela, you know, from feminism, you know, the fact that she was saying Los Siete de la Raza was a very famous group of 7 Latino political prisoners who were falsely accused. And the fact that the smarter you are, the more you learn, you know, the more you acknowledge what you don't know. And so much to say. We're gonna, well, I want to take one more person before we go to Angela part 2. Victor, this is my friend and our friend, Victor Wallace. I've known Victor forever, you know, for a very, very, maybe 50 years. And well, probably 40 plus, but I've known him in a lot of capacities, the editor of Socialism and Democracy, you know, very developed Marxist, a lot of things. But every time I would go to Victor's house in Somerville, and he was one of my closest friends, and I'd stay there a lot, he'd say, you got to get on the phone with this prisoner. He's been waiting to talk to you. And every time he would put me on the phone with some very well-known or not well-known political prisoner. And all the work Victor's done to get prisoners out, to visit prisoners. We once worked on just getting a brother a coat, you know, when he first got out of prison, getting prisoners into courses while they were in college. So working on Mumia's case for so many years and helping, oh, of course, classic Victor, when I went to see you, you said, let's go visit David Gilbert. And we drove, I don't know, many hours to go visit David Gilbert, who was a political prisoner from Weatherman, and who was just, I'm being careful, I don't know the exact words. He's not yet released is the point. He's been, and it's not pardoned. So there's something else that he still has to go in front of the parole board. But Victor, I just thought you'd like to say a couple of words and be part of this conversation. And thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate this opportunity. Can you hear me? Am I on? Yeah, good. Yes, it was great. I mean, I had the good fortune of knowing David Gilbert back in the 1960s when we were both at Columbia. And then we lost contact for a long time. But I reconnected with him in the mid 90s after he'd already been in prison for 15 years. And he had written a book review about Mumia Abu Jamal's first book. And and I was, as you said, we're working on Mumia Abu Jamal's case, and the book review gave his address. So I got back in contact with him. We've been in touch ever since. So I'm really delighted to hear now that what he got was a commutation of his sentence, which allows him to come before the parole board. So the struggle's not over, but I think the momentum is in a positive direction. I'd like to mention a few other cases. The friend who talked with Eric about getting a coat when he got out of prison, I'd like to shout out to him. His name is Hugh Ray Lyons Jr. He died a year and a half ago, and we remained in touch for a long time. I wrote an article about him in the San Francisco Bayview, which you may find if you look up his name, Hugh Ray Lyons Jr. But I think what he illustrated is something of what Angela was talking about, of how the line between what is a social prisoner and a political prisoner. I mean, he was not imprisoned for a political offense, but he was a politically conscious individual, and his consciousness was amplified by his experience in prison. Another case which I will mention briefly is Kevin Rasheed Johnson, with whom I've been in touch for more than 15 years, from Virginia, who is self-described as a social prisoner who became political while in prison. And so he's definitely in that sense, a political prisoner, because he's politically conscious. He organizes prisoners and so on. He co-founded a party, the New African Black Panther Party. And above all, he's been compacted from one state to another. I have a short blog about him at sdonline.org, the blog for our socialism and democracy. And he's now, and this is something that everybody should know about, he's most recently been compacted to the state of Ohio, where he's in the notoriously repressive prison at Lucasville, and is being subjected to all kinds of processes of isolation and denial of his property that had been in Indiana, and so on and so forth. So, but in any case, I think the thing I would mention is, I mean, the whole sector of those who are in prison is such an important part of our whole society. I mean, when you have more than 2 million people in prison, if you think of all the people that have been in prison and all of the families of those who have been, it adds up to tens of millions of people. It's a major section of the population. And the aspect of voter suppression that we're living through now, that we're witnessing, has in a large sense been justified by the sort of the anti-crime type of rhetoric of which Joe Biden is a notable exponent. So in other words, I just want to stress the centrality of the importance of the prison struggles in the larger struggle to transform this society. And I feel honored by all the prisoners that I've been able to work with, some of whom have become really good friends and from whom I've learned a lot.
Well, thanks, Victor. You know, I wrote this book when I got out of prison called Comrade George, an investigation into the life, political thought, and assassination of George Jackson. And originally it was produced by a group called the Hubby Street Press. And there's another version of the book I could show you that we self-published, we edited, we wrote. And back then we sent it to prisoners. If you can imagine, we sent 2,000 copies, but each copy was sent with a letter. It wasn't mass bulked. It was, and the problem was that every prisoner would send you back 2 letters for every letter you sent. So it became like a Sisyphean exercise, because the prisoners are so smart and so philosophical and going through such hard times. The Strategy Center wants to have, like many things we want to have, you know, more of a prisoner's rights component to our work. Very happy to work to help Rasheed Johnson in the last call, but so much more work to do. And this is part of it. This is part of at least to raise our own consciousness. With that, I'd like to hear,
Could I just say one more thing? I just wanted to, regarding songs about George Jackson, I did notice on your site you had a link to Matt Callahan's wonderful song, 99 books in a prison cell. It's a terrific song about George Jackson.
All right, thanks, Victor. Claude, we're going to call on you. Claude Marks, we're so glad you're with us after the second Angela Davis clip, if that's okay. We have some great people on this call. Let's listen to Angela Davis part 2, and let's watch her.
Well, there's so many lessons, but I think it would be important to emphasize the fact that that George was an intellectual, and that even today we sometimes underestimate the role of the intellectual, or the intellectual is considered to be marginal to the actual struggle. And George demonstrated that in order to begin to develop a sense of the nature of the struggle we're involved in, we have to think, we have to read, we have to reflect, and we have to engage in collective reflections. Now that that I've read so much more than I had read then, I know how important education, political education, has been in inside prisons everywhere, from Antonio Gramsci and his amazing prison notebooks to Nelson Mandela and Lolita Lebron. So I think that that one of his lasting legacies is has to do with the purpose of knowledge, the role of knowledge, and he, I think, exemplified how knowledge can be used in a radical and transformative way, how it can be used to change the world. Of course, Frederick Douglass emphasized that without education there is no liberation. But I think that message gets lost sometimes, particularly given the terrible state of the educational system, which is responsible in part for so many people ending up in prison in the first place. George had a way of following these trajectories and thinking about these circuitous connections. And I think that he really led the way toward a field of study that is now actually a part of a number of university campuses, critical prison studies, that is interdisciplinary, that is interdisciplinary in the broadest possible way, interdisciplinary not only in involving all of the disciplines, but in recognizing that knowledge gets produced in many different places, and especially behind bars, and to seeing the prison as a site for the production of knowledge. So when I look at the amazing studies that have been produced over the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, I can trace that development directly to George's insistence on study and collective learning. Thank you for giving me the list of the books that were found in George's cell, and I really appreciated looking through the list, because almost every single text has a memory attached to it, and I was not surprised. But there was one really major surprise. And that was the presence of June Jordan's, an early collection of her poetry. And June is someone who became a very close friend of mine, and I, I love her work and the ways in which she used her talents as a poet to bring change into the world. June was I don't know, maybe one of the first major public figures to speak out in solidarity with Palestine. So I just want to say that when I saw June's book of poetry alongside Marx and Engels and Herb Aptheker and Maurice Cornforth and all of those, it really brought a smile to my face, because I think that we understand better now the role that art and poetry and music play in helping to produce the kind of radical movement that does hold possibilities for change. George was really an internationalist. And as I think back to that period 50 years ago, I realized that that there was a greater capacity to feel as if we were living in the world, not just in one country, but that the world was the place where we lived, and the world was the generator of our responsibilities. And I know that George read very widely. He was aware of what was going on in Vietnam, and he read Ho Chi Minh, and he read about the struggles in Latin America that were unfolding at the time. He was very fluent about what was happening in Africa. And it was very clear that that his stage was an international stage, even though during the last period of his time he was locked up in a small place in the San Francisco Bay. But he was living in the world. He was inhabiting the world. And I think that that kind of internationalism is really needed at this moment, considering the impact of neoliberalism and global capitalism and American exceptionalism, that even in this really spectacular moment of awareness about structural racism, there's the tendency to assume that it's only valid here in this country, and therefore not to think about the ways in which racism has become so institutionalized. Colonialism, slavery, the very basis of capitalism, so that our struggles here should be placed within a context that includes what's happening in Brazil, that includes struggles against police violence in South Africa, because the institution in South Africa is still a racist institution, even though the majority of police officers are Black. That's one of the most compelling examples of the structural and institutional character of racism. So I think that we would do well to study the ways in which George and others developed this sense of themselves as a part of the planet, not simply a part of the United States of America. And to see that someone cultivates this from a prison cell is even more inspiring.
Wow. Claude, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Claude.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi. I mean, just congratulations. for you, Nathaniel, for what you, I mean, this is such a lasting contribution. Claude called me, I don't know, we talked about this probably for a year back and forth, hey, Eric, it's the 50th anniversary. I want to do something big. Well, you sure have. You and Nathaniel, and this is now a contribution to history. What do you think in watching it, even though you produced it? What do you think about it watching it in the evening when others are using your work? And any other thoughts you want to tell us about the process or anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, it's always rewarding to see a piece of work have impact. So, groups like this getting together to, pay attention is far more measurable than all the individuals who might hit on the website. There's no telling what they walk away with. But, I think this is one of the fruits of a lot of hard work to be able to preserve and create a resource of radical politics, of a body of history that I think tends to be overlooked. I appreciated your comments, Victor, about the importance of getting to actually know people who were locked up, which to me, as someone who's also been in prison for many years, that connection becomes very crucial to maintaining a level of productivity, and to note that the purpose of the prison is to basically disappear people, is to disconnect them from their families, from their communities, and from their own sanity in many cases. So that level of resistance that takes place on the inside is overcoming a lot of hurdles, as we can well imagine. And as a movement, we have a responsibility to not allow that disappearance to happen, to fight against the marginalization, and to see people who are locked up in these cages as part of ourselves, and to play a role in, helping them develop and stay focused and centered. So, too often this issue of, people in cages is marginalized. And, for me, one of the more interesting opportunities in a period like this, when there's an upsurge of concern about, unrestrained police violence in the community, it presents us with an opportunity to connect some dots, because the survivors of that police violence often end up locked up in these cages with an intent of disrupting the social fabric of particularly communities of color. And it's that we have to resist. And so the challenge for a lot of families, in fact, just to stay connected, are tremendous. And this isn't just, a small siloed issue. The most impacted people in this world understand these relationships far more viscerally than a lot of the left or the academy. And so we have to break through that, play a role, and insist that, that we kind of create the basis for disrupting and destroying these institutions, prisons, as a way to resolve social conflict. And to see the role of, that they play for the state and basically suppressing the potential for rebellion. So that's my little 2 cents.
It's a very good 2 cents. It's a lot more than that. How many years were you in prison, Claude?
Well, I was clandestine for 13 years and then did 4 years on top of that.
Yeah. Thank you for all you did and we did. it's hard, we're trying to explain something to people that it's hard to understand. But we're all trying to understand. So the question of being disappeared is something I'm very concerned about with Kevin Rasheed Johnson and even with myself. When I was shipped out, every time they would come get me, they would come in the middle of the night, the guards would come. They say, "Man, you're going." I said, "Where am I going?" They say, "None of your effing business." And they put me in handcuffs and they take me into a police car, to go to my next prison. I had no idea where I was going. And as I was driving and looking out the window, and I just saw the people just going through their normal life, it felt like you don't care. I mean, they could kill me in this car. I could never be seen again, and there would be really no consequences for these cops. And the terrifying nature of being shipped out and being disappeared or being arrested and then sent into prison. We focus a lot on all the murders, which of course, but the number of people, the level of mass torture going on, and that's what it is. It's not just imprisonment, but it's active torture of every prisoner. So obviously this series is raising my own consciousness about my own experience, but also my own commitment. Chanting, so what we're trying to do is, by the way, everybody here will do what's called a check out. So if we're not calling on you directly, everybody will get a chance to say something at the end of the program. We'd love to hear what you have to say. I think one of the things that Angela was talking about, and I'm going to go next, we'll have mine next, is the role of the working class intellectual, whether it's Channing or Emily or Barbara, when the whole issue of the mind, of the revolutionary mind is a big theme in this 99 book. Of course, it's called 99 books. Pretty brilliant. So the most famous political prisoner, his legacy, which we'll do another show on, will be the 99 books. And there is a list. And we're going to try to do it with some of it in the Strategy and Soul bookstore. Excuse me. Channing, any thoughts, just where you are now in the process? And Claude, thank you for staying. It meant a lot. I know that. You're very, we'll continue the conversation, but it meant a lot that you were with us. And thanks again to you and Nathaniel for this amazing piece of work.
Well, thank you all. I'm sorry I have to leave, but I was glad to bounce in for a minute. So.
All right. Glad we all got you. Channing, what's on your mind?
Just with Angela Davis, I think what she said is really great. And, the thing I was reflecting on yesterday on the show about what she said is just the role of study. And I think with my generation, we read a lot of articles about very particular things. And there's articles coming out every day from every news source. And you should read that. That's not to say you shouldn't. Like, you should know about what's going on in the world, which is something that Angela just talked about, that George Jackson knows about. But also the role of reading books, which I feel like I don't read enough books anymore. A lot of my friends are not reading big political books anymore. And, the problem with that is then we're out here in this movement trying to make things happen. And we're having the exact same struggles that you had at the 100th level, 100% level in the 1960s, the 1000% level in the 1930s. And if we even get a chance to read just a bit of that knowledge, we can already see, oh, the system tried this one time and the movement tried this and that worked. So, that's what's on my mind. I've been sort of procrastinating reading this book, Black Bolshevik, and it's been 4 years. I need to finish it. But it is a great book, what I've read so far, and I have 25%, and I need to finish that book so that I can move on to my other books. I have you can't see it here, but I have 6 or 7 books here on my bed mantle that are on my immediate list to read, separate from the longer, 100-book list. So I think that's the main thing, is how do I become more disciplined? The second thing that I was reflecting on is that, I think what's interesting about what Angela said is she's mixing ideas that we are sort of not used to mixing. Like, she's saying the prison as a site for knowledge production, which for most of us, that's sort of unreal. How does that happen? And then actually what you're saying, for example, is the public as a site for like just disaggregation of the masses and disaggregation of the movements, which is also not an idea I think that we're used to. And so I think those are two ideas that I'm really excited about, is, for folks who are out here that think that they're free, to some extent, we're saying that you're actually not free. You're so disaggregated that you can't even see it. And how do you become as disciplined as George Jackson, as Angela Davis, as Eric Mann, as all these revolutionaries, to really make your own body as something that can be put on the line, but also as a factor in the knowledge production of the movement. So
that's pretty wonderful. As we're about to introduce my clip, just build on that, Channing. I do read books, and I love books. And I love how big they are. Like, seem to like 500 to 800 page books. And I think the reason is because then I'm spending 3 or 4 months with Paul Robeson, and I'm just thinking about Paul Robeson, and then I'm thinking about Frederick Douglass, and then I'm thinking of Fannie Lou Hamer. I like people, I like movements. I just went back and found a book about the Kenyan Revolution, because you heard how the British used the word Mau Mau, which is a great word. There was and they'll say they Mau Mau'd somebody, meaning they violently attacked them, which was there was an actual liberation struggle in Kenya. And I think what you're right about, Channing, is the book allows you to have a deep conversation with Harry Haywood. You're not reading about Harry Haywood as much as they become your friends. The people you're reading, Leanne reads Maria Mies all the time. And, these become people to whom you're speaking and who are speaking to you, and they become your friends, and they change your ideas, and then you quote them, and it's fun. So yeah, very, very important what you said. And it's a good segue, because you'll see what I talk about in a minute. I just want to, as we play mine, there's a young woman who's not here tonight. Her name is Victoria Stein. She's a filmmaker, and she's become, you could say, my filmmaker. She did and our filmmaker, she did all the video on The Revolution Will Be Strategized. She helped me on my very famous TED Talk that was not accepted, but I'm going to transform it into a RED Talk sometime soon. She's really good at coming in at 3 or 4 minutes and letting you talk. She just lets you talk, but she has ideas. It's not like she's not just pointing and shooting. She says, try it again, or emphasize this, or I think you'd look better standing. And then how she grasps your face, well, you'll see. So we worked together on this. I think we did it in one shoot. So this is my contribution to the conversation about George Jackson, and yes, Channing, the role of books.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Mann. I'm the director of the Labor Community Strategy Center here in South Central Los Angeles. I'm deeply honored to be part of the Freedom Archive tribute to George Jackson on the 50th anniversary of his assassination. We know that George Jackson was murdered. We know he was a great political thinker. I want to talk more about how a person like me ended up having so much of my life related to the life of George Jackson. I was born as a Jew in Brooklyn in 1942. Parents were anti-fascist, and they told me that the Jews and the Negroes are in the same boat. I ended up in the Congress of Racial Equality with the Black militants in Harlem. I worked in the Newark Community Union Project, and then I went to work with SDS, Students for Democratic Society. Out of that, I joined an offshoot or a separate group called Weatherman, in which we believed it was important for white people to be taking very militant actions to up the level of protest against the war in Vietnam and the system's war against the Black liberation movement. I and we initiated an attack on the Harvard Center for International Affairs on September 25th, 1969. I don't know what they were so mad about. All we did was break the windows, spray painted everything, say death to US imperialism, fuck the US system, free the Black prisoners. The concept was purposely to be shocking. If you asked me at the time what would happen, I'll be honest with you, I probably hadn't thought about the consequences very much. So they took me to trial, charged me, and to my shock, they gave me 1 year in prison. A very famous civil rights lawyer said that's an outrage. We should appeal the case, but don't worry, they can't give you any more time under Massachusetts law. Well, we appealed and I got 2 years in prison and 3 years on probation. During that period, I prayed. I prayed to George Jackson and I prayed to Nelson Mandela. What you have to understand is prison is deeply contemplative, and as George said, either they're gonna break you or you're gonna break your old self and become somebody else just out of self-defense. So George, I love you more than I can express. You had my back, you watched over me, and when I was really low, you told me, Eric, you know the job, there's no time to feel sorry for yourself, just get your ass in and do the job. And I said, okay, George, I got it. So I didn't mainly live in terror. I worked and did a book about George called Comrade George, an investigation into the life, political thought, and assassination of George Jackson. And then, through a little bit of luck and good organizing, I convinced Harper and Row to do a mass market paperback, Comrade George, an investigation into the life, political thought, and assassination of George Jackson. I came out of prison to see George Jackson. I got out in July of 1971. I was already becoming a writer about the prison movement. And I went to the Bay Area only to find out that George Jackson was killed. So many elements we could talk about George's life, but I want to focus on George as a Black revolutionary intellectual, and in particular, his role as a Black revolutionary writer. In Comrade George, there's a quote by a prisoner who said, "Why do you think George was killed? Because his writing was blowing the roof off the place." When you say George Jackson, the first thing you think about is Soledad Brother, the prison letters of George Jackson. When you read it, you realize, man, this is an essay on philosophy, history, psychology, all from a Black third world revolutionary genius. This was the link. George took the prison movement, brought it into the revolutionary movement, brought it into the Black Panthers, who in return took George into the Black Panther paper, which is unbelievable, and he became a public intellectual figure. So the freeing of Black political prisoners, the prison movement, was critical to George Jackson's development. In the later version of Soledad Brother, the French playwright Jean Genet says, remember, the Soledad Brother is a call to action, a revolutionary manifesto, a tract, a revolutionary call to action. It's hard to imagine that in 1971, there were approximately 300,000 people in US prisons. If you figure that Black people were 30% of those prisoners with only 10% of the population, that would be 90,000 Black people in prison. Today, there's 2.5 million people in prison, not including millions and millions and millions in the parole system, the probation system, and every other damn system they have. How is it possible there's 1 million Black prisoners today? There were 200,000 people in prison, now there's 200,000 women in prison, 40% of whom are Black. It's because they killed the revolutionaries. They murdered the Black Panthers, Fred Hampton, Little Bobby Hutton, Carl Hampton, George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. You can't have a revolution without leaders, you can't. And you can't have a revolution without revolutionary organizations. Today, the things people are saying about the Panthers, about George Jackson, these are not things you put on a t-shirt. These are real people that you gotta read. You gotta read Soledad Brother. And yeah, I think you gotta read Comrade George as well. You put these two together, I think you have a pretty good understanding. So let me summarize what I think the core issues of George were. The first is George believed that black people were colonial people. As he said, the vast majority of people in the world are Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But we have to kill the barbarians, the white barbarians who create the white settler state. So I think the central question right now is that we need a black-led revolution in the United States. That revolution has to be anti-imperialist and, in my opinion, pro-communist. And when that revolutionary army comes out of the oceans for all the slaves that were killed during the transatlantic slave trade, and when the revolutionary army flies over, you'll see George Jackson leading a squadron of revolutionaries to help us.
Well, it's a lot about a lot of things. Who would like to respond? Emily, are you on? Emily Zamora, are you really with us? Okay. Well, who would like to respond to what I said, and before we move on to a couple other people?
Eric, can I say something?
Sure.
So, first of all, I was delighted to see the list of the 99 books in George's cell, and I went back and looked to see the date of when he was murdered, and the prison officials didn't waste any time of getting into the cell and removing those books. So I'm glad that we know what books he had in the cell. I was remembering back to like 70 years ago. In my recollection, many of the comrades, or some of the comrades who emphasized reading and study and intellectual work and the cultural aspects were soundly or roundly criticized for not being part of the vanguard and not taking up armed struggle. So I believe that was part of the movement that I was around. So it's good to hear emphasis on those aspects now. But I would also say that there's no substitute for being in the street. And people can read books and study and be part of the whole cultural thing, and they can also be in the street and protesting. It's possible to do both, and I think it's essential to do both. That's what I have to say.
And that's Jonah Raskin, who's had a very rich history himself, and we go back many, many years. I think what I'm glad about in listening to what I had to say, because you do your own work and then oh my God, what did I say? Is books, 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 books. Because we assume everybody, Jonah, who we're talking to, is in the street. And the people who are in the streets, because without being in the streets, there is no point in the streets in those broad sense of the class struggle. But I don't see it quite the same way. I mean, we read Soul on Ice, and I read, like I said, in prison, and we were readers, serious readers. And I guess all I'm just trying to say is tonight is a focus, I think, on Black revolutionary intellect. and how through, we're going to listen to another brother now, but the concepts, the internationalism, the love of knowledge. I was talking to Leanne again today, you know, about yoga. I learned yoga in prison. And one of the great things about yoga is you can do it in your cell. What are they going to do to you? I mean, you have yourself. You breathe, you stretch, you read. That's about all. And you go to the bathroom. That's about all they let you do there. So I think I'm very glad I did Comrade George. I'm very glad I'm rereading Soledad Brother. And I think what I'd like to do is play the audio from James Baldwin, and then maybe get Thomas. I don't know if you want to say anything, but Leanne and Thomas, Marilyn, I don't know if you're here, as the next three after James Baldwin, and then Eddie Conway, and then we'll say goodnight. So,
Eric?
Miss Leanne.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something about your video, and just important to say, it was very nicely done and very well framed in every way. And I just wanted to share with other people here that, you know, Eric and I have known each other for a long time. But when I first met him, he was carrying Comrade George, and he was trying to organize me and my mother to take his class on the history of the 60s in 1974. The first book to read being Comrade George. So
Works
I have
well.
I have to say, it's just delightful to see you still talking about George.
That means a lot, Leanne, you know that. And yeah, thanks for everything. This is still great to be alive and still great to be doing what we do, you know? And obviously Leanne has shaped my life as much as I've shaped hers. And we'll do a whole program about the two of us tonight. We'll see who wants to come. But we think it's great. And that means a lot what you said, Leanne. Thank you. I'm going to introduce James Baldwin for a minute. What an amazing man. I mean, the thing, you know, a lot speaking to you, Channing, and to you, Barbara, and to you, Emily, and everybody else here, that the more you're in the movement, the more confidence and the more generosity of spirit, the more complexity of your thought and problem solving, is that James Baldwin becomes your friend, you know, and Channing as a Black queer man, you know, to look at the leading, not Bayard Rustin, sorry, but James Baldwin as the leading Black queer revolutionary of his time, and the amazing role of intellect. I wrote an article about the Columbia strike in Counterpunch. I did a lot of work on it. And what I learned is that the Black students who formed, you know, the Black Student Union and led the struggle, they came to Columbia pretty bourgeois in a lot of ways, because not in a bad way. I mean, they came out of families and they had been the first Black people who ever got into college. So their aspirations were, let's go to one of the best universities, get a good degree and help our people the best we could. But somehow they were organized by H. Rap Brown and James Baldwin and almost all the leading Black intellectuals chose to organize the Black students at Columbia to say, this is not about your role in society, this is about your role in changing society. And the goal is not to integrate into this shithole of racist capitalism and to be so proud you're the first, But to ask yourself, why are you the first? And what's so great about that in a racist system? Here we are in 1964. So James Baldwin was the intellectual in many ways to the revolutionaries. And the last thing I want to say is that, there's a thing in on colonialism. I'm blocking some names, sorry, but he said that Europe is indefensible. And what's it called? An essay on colonialism. So let's listen to James Baldwin and listen carefully to his conclusion.
It's difficult to talk about this because there are two things. I'm haunted by the face of his mother, because it might be my mother. And I have brothers and sisters, and I've been haunted by the face of Jonathan because it could have been my brother. I'm trying to say that beneath the political implications of this bloody event, there's also an anguish which has endured in my country for nearly 400 years. I think this anguish has some implications for all the countries of the West. And I think that one has the right then to suppose that the burden of proof is on the American authorities and not on the people who contest this particular story. I myself have lived through too many murders and too many assassinations to believe a word that Nixon or Reagan or John Mitchell or any of the other American authorities say. I do not believe that a boy can hide a gun in his hair. I do not believe that a maximum security prisoner can receive a visitor who is neither questioned nor identified. I challenge California to identify Madam Anderson, who carried something in her shoe, I think. I think that if we really are going to be serious about this, and to prevent another murder in another prison, or in another American street, or on a French street, had to assume that we have nothing to prove. I have nothing to prove. I know very well what it is like to be a black man in America. I know very well that the intention of the American Republic, which after all comes out of Europe, was to keep black people slaves forever. And I know that now that black people have discovered in their own minds, in their own hearts, that they are not what they are told they were, that America is on the verge of panic, on the verge of civil war. I scarcely know how to be in any way objective this afternoon. For me, there's been Medgar Evers, who was murdered in Mississippi, and Malcolm X, who was murdered in New York, and Martin, who was murdered in Memphis, and Huey in jail, and Bobby in jail. And one begins to wonder how long one can keep paying that bill. And what I want to suggest this afternoon is that instead of paying it, endlessly going to funerals, endlessly seeing widows, endlessly seeing corpses, endlessly being told lies, that we challenge them. I want Ronald Reagan to write a letter to me and to Georgia Jackson, telling me exactly what happened in that prison and how he knows. I want Nixon to confirm it, and the Attorney General of the United States and his charming wife to tell me while we are still in prison and at their mercy. As long as that is so, the entire Western world is doomed.
Wow. The entire Western world is doomed. You know, the strategy center, we always say we're a small organization because we are. We don't always want to say that. Someday we'll say we're big again. But I'm better and better at just understanding the role we want to play as revolutionary intellectuals in the movement, and how, again, for Channing and Barbara and Emily, who have access to groups, the ability to say something outside the bounds of thinkable thought, as you saw everybody doing tonight, of Angela, to say, all of Europe is doomed, your system. I have nothing more to explain. Too many of the groups are focusing on winning this and winning that, and they say they're fighting for social justice, and purposely do not discuss what system are you trying to get social justice from. There's no mention of a system. There may be mention of police brutality at the most, but everybody else here was talking about a system in crisis. And again, we reinforce. I mean, now you hear George and you hear Angela, and yeah, you hear me influenced by George and Angela. Now you hear James Baldwin, and I've heard Channing at a debate in a city council, in a real city council meeting, being able to talk like this, not just abstractly, but at the first AME church, to say, I want to cut the police by 50%. I want to, 50% of all new jobs must go to Black applicants. When they asked him, should Uber drivers get a raise, he said, I don't want a city full of Ubers. I want no cars in LA. So the constant effort to find the countervailing thought, to put it in the spheres, because we won the battle of Algiers, and we won the battle of ideas, that there was a time when we had the power and the authority to go into a meeting and say things like that. And I'm deeply organized by the evening. I'd like to get, I definitely want to hear the last brother, Eddie Conway, who was in prison for,
yes,
do you know about him?
Yeah, and he works now for the Real News, a journalist. Yeah,
exactly. So amazing. He did 43 years. Unbelievable. And now he's working for the Real News, and I want to reach out to him. Want to get him on Voices because we have our own radio show. So if it's okay, we'll show Eddie, and then everyone will do a last check out and we'll say goodnight. Is that okay? All right. And I want to hear from everybody. It means a lot that you've stayed. All right, let's hear what Eddie Conway has to say.
We first heard about George Jackson because we were members of the Black Panther Party. So when he joined the Black Panther Party and was made a field marshal, then everybody in the Black Panther Party was informed about him. But prior to that, we actually wasn't very aware of him. Uh, the Soledad situation had happened, but it wasn't getting national news coverage. And but by him becoming part of the Black Panther Party, it immediately got national news coverage. Learning about him, I mean, we got to read. He was a prolific writer, and he was writing a number of things. And some of it was being printed individually. Some of it was being printed in the Black Panther Party paper. Uh, we actually started looking and studying as how he was operating in the California prison system. Uh, and we looked at the conditions that he operated in. Obviously, he was in a prison system that that had a mixture of Latinos, and it had a mixture of whites and blacks, and the three groups pretty much did not get along very well, and so there were always conflicts and clashes. And I think part of what George Jackson had to do was figure out how to organize in the black population and protect the black population, but at the same time uh, educate people around the struggle of anti-capitalism. Uh, so we looked at him, we studied what he was doing, and then we compared and contrasted to where we were. We were in Maryland, and our population was primarily black, 75 to 80%, uh, with the white population being in the uh, minority, 20 to 25%. So we never had a problem of being attacked by white people, white prisoners, uh, even though the guards were constantly instigating that kind of stuff. The white population itself knew that that was not a win-win situation for them. But then we also realized that we wanted to do some organizing similar to what George Jackson was doing, to just kind of like, one, to protect ourselves, but two, to organize the greater population. So we studied him. We studied other prison situations and movements, and it at some point decided how we would operate and how we would move forward. He was a great theoretician. Oh, and he was a practitioner too. Obviously, a revolutionary, a comrade. Uh, but yes, I think that was the position, and I think that's why he was eventually recruited to the Black Panther Party. I think that was the position of the Black Panther Party. We understood that there would be down on the ground conflicts and contradictions, but that didn't supersede the major contradiction of how the capitalist ruling class was treating all of us down on the ground, and that the only way forward would have been unity. And I think he was always, in his writings and his application, was always pushing that idea. We were pushing that idea. That's the only way out of this whole situation, is for us to unify. Uh, and divide and conquer only serves Caesar. So yeah, we understood that, and we understood he understood it, and we learned from that. But um, in some cases, even when you learn from that, you still have to protect yourself from those right wing fanatics, or other activities or other groups. And in the case of Maryland, we had the drug dealers in the prison system that we had to organize against and protect ourselves against. But that's internal contradictions. It was a list that covered revolutionary struggles around the world: Cuba, Vietnam, China, Africa, Algiers, South Africa, etc., South America, Europe. It covered philosophy. It covered so many different things. It looked at fascism, mass psychology and fascism and so on. He was well read, but he was a probably in the prison system. Um, of course, that's after Malcolm X had left. He was probably the the intellectual among prisoners throughout the nation. in terms of his insight, in terms of him he looked 1,000 years into the future, you know, and he knew that this wasn't just one of those things that would just happen, uh, but he looked at long-term strategy. So his books kind of encompass that. So he looked back in history and he realized that um, that we had a relationship with the struggles that occurred for the last couple thousand years. Um, so I think his books indicate that, his writings indicate that, and I think later on he's probably, and I would say this, probably the most well-read prisoner among prisoners than anybody else. Well, one of the things that we did, and I had comrades outside. My brother, uh, Paul Coates, who was a former defense captain in the Black Panther Party. He was outside. He was supporting our internal struggle inside the prison. We made a determination. What I found when I stepped in the prison system was that there was no library. There was like 4,000 people and no books. And it was deliberate, it was intentional. The guards did not want prisoners to read. So one of the first things we did as we started organizing was to organize to get books inside the prison. And to do that outside, well, Paul created the George Jackson Prison Project. And we worked with outside to ship books inside the prisoners, and we took over a couple cells and we built a library in the prison in among the housing area. And it was so embarrassing that the state ended up getting money, allocating money to build a library, because they did not want us in charge of a library, and they could not justify having 4,000 people and no library. But it was the George Jackson Prison Project that we worked on, that eventually turned into the Black Classic Press, which is now probably the largest private owned uh, black press in this side of the Mississippi. Uh, but all of this started because we recognized the work that George Jackson was doing, and we wanted it to be plain for people outside and inside what we were saying and what we were talking about, and using George Jackson's name made that very clear to everybody on all sides of the equation. The state found him so dangerous really because of his ideas. Uh, a lot of people look at the Black Panther Party, or they look at self-defense, or they look at militant actions, or they look at survival programs, and they order newspapers, and they think all of those things might be a reason for the state to fear. But what the state feared was the ideas, the ideology of the wealth of the world belongs to the people of the world, and people need to organize and gain control of that wealth and gain control of those industries and make them work in the benefit of people on the planet. That was the most scariest thing to a capitalist and a parasite who's trying to accumulate all the wealth for themselves. So it was that ideology that made him the greatest threat. They didn't care about any of the rest. I mean, they did care about the rest of the stuff, but the idea was the most dangerous of all. And that was something that was resonating throughout the prison systems in America. You could get the Soledad Brothers. You could get all kinds of material with George Jackson's name, and it would pop up in Connecticut. It would pop up in Florida, in Texas. It would pop up in Oregon, and the prison officials and the ruling class officials had to stop that. the same way they had to marginalize Huey, Bobby, Stokely, etc., and a number of other people that were targeted, including Martin Luther King. COINTELPRO, and you just Judas and the Black Messiah kind of like pointed it out a little bit. You look at it and it looks like there's a direct link between the FBI and the local police and whatever activities take place. But COINTELPRO actually operated like an octopus, and it used the LAPD, it used the New York PD, it used police departments, it used federal agencies, internal revenue, it used the postal service, it used every industry institution that the government could touch was available to COINTELPRO. And there's no question in my mind, um, and and I don't know whatever happened to Louis Tackwood and the Glass House tape. And there's hundreds, of, obviously, conspiracies, uh, but there's no question in my mind that this whole thing was manipulated to eventually assassinate George Jackson. Um, and the government was behind it. Uh, and it's always questionable, even with Malcolm X. It's questionable where that authority stopped at. Did it stop at the CIA? Did it stop at the FBI? Did it stop at the House Un-American Activity Committee? Where did it stop? It doesn't matter. It's the government itself have targeted uh, first the Black Panther Party, then Jonathan Jackson, and then ultimately George Jackson. "50 years later, what's useful is several things. One, to study, to read, to understand, to develop a full analysis of what it is we're dealing with and how we can deal with it. That's one thing. The other thing was that George Jackson was, like I say, a practitioner. And so he also demonstrated by staying in shape, taking care of himself, by writing and reaching out to people as much as he could. So it's theory and it's practice. That was true 50 years ago. That's true today. Young people need to develop that theory, and then they need to figure out how to apply under today's conditions practice. One of the things that George, and there's always a lot of debate about fascism. It's not here. It's not. It's we're just being repressed. For some groups of people, the indigenous population has been under a fascist kind of occupation since day one, and most of them have disappeared, unfortunately. For other people, 200, 300, 400 years of enslavement and hanging from the trees in the south and the north. Uh, to us, that appears to be fascism. George was always saying fascism was coming. Now, I recognize fascism is not here. They made a serious effort to January the 6th, but they're not here yet, and they want to be here. But in some cases, we have lived under the cloak of fascism. And George was always pointing that out. He was pointing out that the thing about fascism is that, and the most simplest thing about fascism is it reforms and it keeps coming back to you in different shapes. And um, after George Bush, it comes back as George Bush Light Obama. After Obama, it comes back as crazy Trump. After crazy Trump, it comes back as Trump Light Biden. And so fascism continues to reform and it continues to present itself as your friend until such time that you are alone and isolated and disappear. So, I mean, that George was constantly pointing out, and we need to pay attention to that going into the future.
Wow. Unbelievable evening. Yes, Jenny.
I don't know if everyone wants to take a moment to turn on your lights if you need it. I see a bunch of dark screens.
Is that better? Thanks, Jenny. I just want to say one thing and then go to everybody who hasn't spoken, even to just keep the conversation going. I was talking to Leanne, and I'm working on a book, that my working on a book the rest of my life, but I'm planning to truly finish. It's called In Search of the Revolution, The Journey of a Movement Organizer. And I plan to finish a great deal of it this year and send it off to an agent, publisher, and let's get started. But this week I got lost in George Jackson. I couldn't help it, in preparation for this day. We did the show yesterday, and I don't do anything that I don't immerse myself in. I couldn't be working on one thing and, oh yeah, we're going to do George. But for me, this is such a deeply moving evening, and the constant discussion of the Black mind, not just, the intellectual in general. So several quick thoughts, and then we'll throw it up into everybody. When I went into the Congress of Racial Equality in 1964, all my teachers were Black. I was the only white person on the field staff. And that's how we talked. That's how they talked. We talked till 12, 1, 2 in the morning, and then sat in and then got arrested and did all the stall-ins and fight-ins. But the philosophical nature of why we were doing this, the internationalism, the sense of introspection, what's going on within Nkrumah, and what's going on, why did Patrice Lumumba get overthrown? Is there anything we can learn from that? What do you think about Malcolm's debate with Martin? Martin's actually got some good points, but obviously, we would defend Martin a certain way to understand what he was trying to do. So just 2 thoughts. When we built Strategy and Soul at the corner of King and Crenshaw, think about what we did. We opened up a bookstore and a film theater. Those were our choices, as well as a center for community organizing. And I think we should be very proud of that, because God, he said, what's the big thing about George Jackson? His ideology, his ideas. Not to say that the breakfast program wasn't great. Not to say, of course, the armed struggle wasn't great. We assume that, Jonah, as you're saying. You can't have the ideas without the practice. But every person here has chosen sort of independently to focus on George as a political thinker. Just to tell you that we are going to put out a job description very soon for a manager of Strategy and Soul books. It would have to be somebody Black who has already had a history of working in a bookstore and who knows these books, who doesn't have to know. And then we're also, as Leanne and I were talking about, we're going to print out slowly those 99 books and figure out something to do with at least a lot of them. So we need a bookstore. We need a bookstore with more resources, more people to run it. But thank God we have a bookstore, is the point. And thank God we have a film theater. And thank God we have a film club. So who would like to speak and say goodnight? And then we may have 1 or 2, maybe ask Jenny and Barbara to say last words. But Benny, are you on? Thomas, would you like to speak? Jeffrey, Melinda, others? Raise your, if you can go online and just, what do you call it? Go on your screen so we can see you. And we'd love to hear from you if you'd like to say something.
I'll go first, if that's all right.
Sure.
I just read George Jackson's book after listening to you on the radio a month ago or so. So I picked it up,
Wow.
and it was really interesting reading in the letters how George wanted John to be educated and what he wanted John to focus on in his studies. And listening to one of the other speakers on here talk about how the prisons disrupt the family life in the community, and how slick the state can be in preventing that knowledge production in these communities. Because what they've done, I'm a teacher, 27, 8 years, whatever, but this Common Core thing and A through G requirements, and they keep the kids so busy taking classes they have no interest in and repeating classes over and over again. They don't have time to take a class where they can produce this knowledge and do anything but just try and find some little corner for themselves to fit in this system that's so screwed up. And it's just so slick because so many people buy into it, black, brown, white, poor, into this Common Core, A through G. Everybody can go to UCLA as a freshman. I mean, that's the story. And then just one last thing, what I've seen with the kids in my classroom, they blame themselves. So in the end, when they're all done with this, graduate or not, they have convinced themselves that they would be in UCLA if they worked harder, as if everybody can squeeze into the 95th percentile. And it's so sad. And I run into people later on, you know, who, oh, and they find out I'm a teacher. Oh man, I wish I worked harder. Hey, so I'm glad you guys are there. I'm glad. Just one more thing, Eric, Comrade George, I just did a little quick searching and stuff. Is it like, where is it?
Well, first of all, if you find it, let me know.
I saw one copy for $100.
Oh, that's not bad.
I'm not going to do that.
Well, that'll be the lowest price you'll see. Someday I have about 10, 15 left. I'm gonna do sell one for $1,000 for the Strategy Center.
There you go.
Because when we first published it, they did 15,000 copies of that beautiful yellow book, and they gave me five. You know me. Sorry, I asked them. Part of my contract, they had to give me 500 books for prisoners free. So we got 500 books that we also mailed out because we didn't want the prisoners to just have. But Jeffrey, what you said is great. Thank you for being a voiceless listener and doing something. You know, a lot of people listen and don't do a damn thing. So the fact that you got the book, let's stay in touch. You know, you have my email, right? Eric at Voices from the Front Lines. And the whole question of internalized oppression, wow, we can get into a whole nother conversation about, but thank you, thank you, thank you. And one thing about Emily Zamora is she is one of the people that did get into UCLA and went to, you know, Oshie High School and then went to Santa Monica, right, community college, and then went to UCLA. But if you're there, Emily, is trying very hard to stay as a revolutionary intellectual. And when they told her at UCLA, you have to stop all your work so that you could be a really good student, she said, no, my political work is my life. You can't tell me to stop doing that work. But consistently what you said, Jeffrey, you stay in the A to G and don't worry about that politics. Melinda, would you like to say something? Are you still there? Thomas?
Yeah, real quick. This is Thomas. Thank you for the opportunity and for putting this event together. I had the same question regarding the book you wrote, but I wasn't going to pay 100, neither 1,000. But I'll send you my email. Maybe there is a way of borrowing a copy at some point for a couple of weeks or so. That would be lovely. I'm familiar with Soledad Brother, and I'm from LA. Used to be with People's College of Law up until recently, and yeah, I enjoyed the presentation. Lots of useful information, and thank you very much.
Well, we have more ideas than capacity. We also have ideas for a lending library. And yes, I will contribute one to the lending library. And
maybe you could put me in the email in the Rolodex for future events.
All right, yes. So send it to me, Eric at voicesfromthefrontlines.com. And Channing, do we have everybody's email who signed up for this when they register?
Yes, we do.
All right, so Tom, we'll be in touch, Thomas. Thank you.
All right.
And because you're a friend, I might be able to get it to you for $99, but we'll work on it, okay? Give you the Jewish discount. Let's see, is there anybody else who would like to speak and say goodbye?
I can just say goodbye. I thought it was a splendid program, and I just wanted to mention that the interest in books is continuing, and Rasheed has been compared to George Jackson as an intellectual. I know partly from the books that he's asked me to order for him. So it's not just the books that I choose, but the ones that he chooses from all over the lot, which is it's amazing. But there are other prisoners that I work with also who are working on educating their fellow prisoners, and so they illustrate this point that George Jackson himself made, that prison either makes you indestructible. If it doesn't destroy you, it makes you indestructible. That's not his exact words, but that's essentially what he said. And so these are some of the indestructibles.
Thanks, Victor. Abraham, how are you? You're on mute, Abraham. Get off. Are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi, nice to hear from you.
Wonderful program. It's my first time to hear about this man, Jackson. And I've learned a lot, especially now that I am involved in a small way in a prison ministry as a chaplain. Yeah, there is a lot to learn. 12 years ago from Kenya. So when you talked about the Mau Mau, my own parents were involved in the freedom struggle. And so I've learned a lot. Thank you for putting together this event.
Abraham, where do you live?
I live near Columbus, Ohio. And I do part-time chaplain's work in a state prison, although I haven't been there now for 2 months because of budget issues, but I'm hoping to go back soon. And there is a lot I can learn from the life of Jackson, and hopefully I can be able to look for a way of getting some of those books.
Yeah. Do you go to the Lucasville prison?
Encouragement. Sorry?
The prison at Lucasville?
No, I am at
Rasheed is.
London Christian Fellowship, London Correctional Institution.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Abraham, you said, are you saying, are you the one who said you met me in Hong Kong?
Yes, I met you those many years ago. I forget what forum it.
It was called the Urban.
My doctorate. We either met in Hong Kong. Remember, but yeah, and then I followed you up. I looked you online. The organization you are leading, and so It's how I got to know about this event.
Very wonderful. Let's talk soon.
Yes, good.
That's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Are you still here? Okay. How about Leanne, Barbara, and Channing for just saying goodnight?
Okay, so I don't know if you have a copy close at hand of your the book that has every word in the left on it, the title. Well, just in the spirit of the book thing, I just got a new one for you that you'll appreciate. Here, let's see. How does it go? Not a nation. This is Not a Nation of Immigrants. Settler colonialism, white supremacy, and the history of erasure and what? It's Erasure and Exclusion by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And it's nice and fat. You can, spend a good number of nights with this, Eric. And then we can get Roxanne to come and visit.
That would be wonderful, Leanne. And yeah, my book, which I don't have to go get it, says Katrina's Legacy. The fuck did that say? The Black Nation, the Black Latinx Alliance, Third World Women, the people of the world confront the US imperialist white settler state and its genocidal climate crimes. So I'm going to check mine against Roxanne's and see who has more words on it. My kind of book, Leanne.
Yep, I knew.
My kind of book. I'll be seeing in a few minutes and we'll be studying. Very sweet, Leanne. Barbara.
Good night. No. I want you to just leave with three thoughts from what Eddie was saying. One is the indigenous people of North America have been under occupation and fascism since 1492. And when I heard him say that, that sounded like the Strategy Center. When they asked what happened or where it all began, we say, well, let's start at 1492. So that just clicked for me. And the point he made that we are living under the cloak of fascism is really serious. And January 6th, fascism was at our door. So it's coming. It's the thing that we are fighting against. And I appreciate it. I just wanted to say with Eddie, 43 years of imprisonment as a political prisoner and coming out. And I want to thank you for your continuous support and your continuous work in the movement. Thank you very much.
We'll be in touch with him, Barbara, to make that, let's reach out to him right away. Channing?
Not much more. I mean, I think this was a really great night. There's so much more to study. And I think even in these comments that everyone's making, they're not just passerby comments, they're very profound comments. I've been working a lot with Emily Zamora, and we've been having that exact conversation that Jeffrey has been talking about. And we joke around that and she laughs because I'm like, well, you get that UCLA is trying to steal you away, basically. Every time she's in this new program and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, Chan, I can't make it today. They just announced another activity and they're making it required. And yep, that's totally fine. We love you anyways, Emily. We'll see you another day. But just recognize, look at what they're doing. They're trying to steal you away, basically, trying to fill your time with everything about UCLA so that by the time you graduate, you're going to be so excited to say, oh, I'm an alumni from UCLA, and then go off and leave the hood and leave your people behind just to become another capitalist, because that's what they're really trying to train you to do, is to take up the system. And she actually agrees with that. And she is, in our conversations and in her work, is working to stay grounded in movement building and figure out how can you use UCLA as a tool to strengthen her own movement building and her own intellect, which I think is really great.
And since Emily's not here and we're talking about you, Emily, it all's taped, so we're saying good things. We thought you were here for a while, but just a couple of last things. UCLA is also a center of really careerism. A lot of people there who are even studying the things that we say we're studying. It creates a material basis for opportunism, which is you go there and you get grants and go speak at conferences and you all think you're real smart and you write books for each other and you act as if you're really important, and you do often parlay that. The university parlays that into power in the system. On the other hand, it's important to know that Stokely and almost all the students who went down south were from Howard and from historically Black colleges and universities. And they were university trained and they chose to devote their life to the masses as the highest form of their study. So we all got life choices to make, and Emily's among the best, and so are you, Channing. And so are you, Barb, and so are you, Leanne. We all, we got our education and we decided what to do. It's same with you, Victor. And when I attacked Harvard, Victor, I was really thinking of you. And, and all of my other Harvard friends. All right, much love to everybody. It couldn't have been a nicer evening.
Everybody, the whole show.
All right, couldn't have been a nicer evening, and we promise it's a 30-day, we can't probably pull up every 2 weeks, but this is gonna be a regular thing, and it couldn't have been a more wonderful evening. Much love to everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Eric, your email one more time, please.
Eric at voices from thefrontlines.com, which is the name of the radio show.
Thank you.
Voices from thefrontlines.com. Hope to hear from you.
Lord, they laid him in the ground.
Bye, Victor. Nice to spend the day with you.
Right. Eric.
Good night, Victor.
Nice to see you.
Good night, Abraham. Very beautiful to see you. Good night, Tom.